What do you do when the family you once knew suddenly returns, demanding what they believe is theirs? Grace had already lost so much, but now her own flesh and blood were trying to take away the last piece of security she had. How will she navigate this betrayal and fight for what's rightfully hers? Stay tuned to see how Grace stands up to the family she was abandoned by, and how she plans to reclaim her life and her legacy. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this. My name's Grace, and life took a difficult turn when I was just 10. My dad had been sick for a while, but I didn't fully understand what was happening until the day he was gone for good. One moment he was there, and the next, there was just an empty seat at the dinner table. It didn't take long for my mom to try and fill that empty space. 2 months later, she brought home Victor. I guess she was feeling lonely and needed someone fast. Victor moved in like he owned the place, and it was clear he didn't want me around. "Grace, this is Victor. Victor, this is my daughter, Grace." Mom introduced us the day he moved in. Victor looked at me coldly, almost as if I were a nuisance. "Hi," I said, feeling awkward but trying to be polite. He just nodded, not even offering a smile. Turning to Mom, he said, "Linda, can we talk about the living arrangements?" I remember feeling a chill as they walked off, his hand on her shoulder. It didn't take long before I started feeling like an outsider in my own home. Victor imposed rules for everything, always on my case. "Don't leave your things in the living room. Eat faster. Don't make too much noise." It was non-stop. Mom went along with whatever Victor said, her eyes distant, maybe tired. I could never quite tell. One evening at dinner, things finally exploded. I accidentally knocked over a glass of water, and it spilled towards Victor. "Clumsy kid, can't you do anything right?" he snapped, jumping up as the water splashed onto his pants. "Sorry, Victor, it was just an accident," I stammered, feeling my face turn red. "Sorry doesn't clean up messes, Grace. Be more careful," he scolded, his voice rising. Mom just sat there, silently dabbing her mouth with a napkin. I looked at her, hoping for a word of support, but she said nothing. That night, I heard them arguing in their room. Victor's voice was harsh. "Linda, that kid of yours needs to shape up. I'm not going to live in chaos just because you're used to it." Mom's reply was soft, but I could catch bits of it. "Victor, please, she's just a child. She's still adjusting." "Adjusting? It's been months. I'm telling you, if things don't change—" I didn't need to hear the rest. The message was clear. Victor wanted me out of the way, and Mom wasn't putting up much of a fight. The months that followed were just as hard. Victor's complaints became a daily routine, and Mom's silence only grew heavier. I was walking on eggshells, trying not to make a sound, trying to make myself invisible. But how can you disappear in your own home? Even a 10-year-old knows that's impossible. Things got even more complicated when Mom told us she was expecting. Victor, already struggling to tolerate me, didn't exactly take the news well. There was a long silence before he spoke, his words cold. "Well, that's just great, Linda. Just what we needed," he said, dripping with sarcasm. Mom smiled weakly. "It's a blessing, Victor, you'll see. A fresh start for us." I felt a mix of excitement and dread. A little brother or sister seemed like a dream, a new person to connect with. But with Victor's mood swings, I wasn't sure what to expect. The months went by quickly, and finally, the baby arrived. It was a girl, and they named her Lily. I was thrilled. She was so tiny, and when I first saw her wrapped up in her pink blanket, my heart melted. I thought maybe Lily's arrival would change things, even soften Victor's mood. Holding her felt magical. She was so small, her tiny fingers grasping at nothing. "Hey there, Lily. I'm your big sister, Grace. I'm going to take good care of you," I whispered, silently promising to be there for her, no matter what. But the magic didn't last. Bringing Lily home changed things again. Victor became fussier than ever, especially about money. One night, about a week after Lily came home, I overheard him talking to Mom in the kitchen. His voice was harsh, louder than it needed to be. "More expenses, Linda. Diapers, formula, who knows what else? And what about Grace? She's not even mine, and I'm paying for her too." Mom's voice was a quiet murmur. "Victor, please. She's just a child. We can manage, things will settle down." "Yeah, it's not just about managing, Linda. It's about priorities. We need to think about our family now, our real family." I knew what that meant. I wasn't real family. The sting of those words hit me hard. I slid down the wall by my door, hugging my knees, trying not to cry. The final straw came when Victor sat us down in the living room one evening. His face was serious and he avoided looking at me. Linda, we need to think about the future. Grace is getting older and expenses are piling up. Maybe it's time she went to live with her Aunt Joyce. It felt like a punch in the gut, being sent away just like that. Mom finally spoke, looking at me with sad eyes. Grace, honey, it might not be so bad. Aunt Joyce has a nice house, and you'll be well taken care of. But Mom, I don't want to go. I want to stay here with you and Lily. The room went silent. Victor's next words were cold and final. It's decided then. I'll call Joyce in the morning. Moving in with Aunt Joyce was like stepping into a different world. Her house was big, clean, and always silent. Too silent for comfort. The first day I arrived, she laid down her rules like we were negotiating a peace treaty after a long war. You'll follow my rules under my roof, Grace. No nonsense, no mess, no backtalk, she declared as she led me through the hall to what would be my room. The room was plain, with bare walls and a single bed in the corner. It felt nothing like home. I nodded, too tired and upset to argue. Homework right after school, chores before dinner, and lights out by 8. I won't tolerate any laziness or sloppiness, you hear? Aunt Joyce continued, her voice firm. Yes, Aunt Joyce, I whispered. Speak up when you're spoken to. I'll have no mumbling here, she snapped. I quickly corrected my tone. Yes, Aunt Joyce, I understand. The days that followed blended into each other, each as strict and unforgiving as the last. Aunt Joyce was tough, tougher than anyone I'd ever known. She had a way of making simple conversations feel like interrogations. Homework was a battlefield too. If I got a B instead of an A, Aunt Joyce had sharp words for me. You can do better than this. Your laziness won't fly here, she'd scold, even though I'd spent hours poring over books. The worst part was how she reminded me of my mom's decision to send me away. If I dared to talk back or ask for less criticism, she'd retort sharply, No wonder your mom sent you here. You need discipline. You obviously weren't getting it. Those words hurt. They always did. They made me feel unwanted, unloved, like I didn't belong anywhere. I was just another problem Mom solved by sending me away. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. I learned to keep my head down, do what I was told, and only speak when necessary. Aunt Joyce had no patience for tears or complaints, and I didn't have the energy left to fight. It's for your own good, she'd often say after scolding me harshly, as if her sharp words were supposed to make me into someone better. I wasn't sure who that better person was supposed to be. All I knew was that I was getting really good at being alone, at being quiet, and at not being a problem, because in Aunt Joyce's house, not being a problem was the best thing you could be. Living with Aunt Joyce felt suffocating, and every day I found myself missing my mom more, even though I knew she wouldn't have fought too hard to let me go. One afternoon, the weight of that longing became too much to bear. Aunt Joyce was out probably at her bridge club, and I knew I had at least a couple of hours to myself before she came back. Her phone, always left charging on the kitchen counter next to the fruit bowl, felt like the only connection to my old life. I hesitated for a moment before picking it up. Dialing my mom's number felt like muscle memory. I hadn't forgotten it, and I wasn't sure I ever would. My heart raced as the phone rang. Once, twice, and then her voice. Hello? Mom, it's me, Grace. There was a pause, maybe a breath. Then she spoke, her voice tight. Grace, why are you calling? I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I just wanted to hear your voice. See, another long pause before she spoke again, but this time her voice was cold, distant. You shouldn't have called. But, Mom, I pleaded, my voice breaking. I miss you. I miss home. When can I come back? Her words were flat, emotionless, as though she were discussing the weather. You can't. That's done. Don't call here anymore. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mom, please, just... Grace, there's nothing here for you. Goodbye. The line went dead. The silence in the kitchen felt suffocating. My hand trembled as I put the phone back on the charger. The finality in her voice shattered something inside me. She didn't want me. She really didn't want me anymore. Tears welled up in my eyes as I stumbled to my room. I closed the door softly, trying to keep my pain quiet, not wanting to give away how badly I was breaking. I collapsed to the floor, my back against the bed, and let myself cry. The room felt smaller than ever, like the walls were closing in around me. I heard the front door open and close. Aunt Joyce's voice rang out, sharp and demanding. "Grace, you better have finished your chores." "Yes, Aunt Joyce," I called back quickly, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. I couldn't let her see me weak. Weakness wasn't allowed here. I went to the kitchen to help with dinner, acting like nothing had happened, but inside, I felt different, emptier, more alone. Mom's cold words kept echoing in my mind. Later that night, Aunt Joyce found the call log on her phone. Her face twisted into a scowl, and she stormed into my room, her voice a sharp whisper that cut through the quiet. "So, you took my phone to call your mother? Thought you'd go behind my back?" I froze, feeling the blood drain from my face. I just wanted to hear her voice. Aunt Joyce laughed, a cruel, grating sound. "And what did that get you, huh? She doesn't want you, Grace. Even you can't deny it now." Her words were like ice, and they chilled me to the bone. She grabbed my arm, her grip tight and painful. "No more phone, no more parties. You're here because she doesn't want you. Remember that." The punishment was severe. More chores, stricter rules, and the cold shoulder from Aunt Joyce. Every day felt heavier than the last. It was clear I was nothing but a burden to her, a nuisance she tolerated only because she had to. But a year into my stay, Aunt Joyce finally snapped. "You're packing your bags today, Grace," she announced one morning over breakfast, her voice cold and final. I stared at her, my spoon halfway to my mouth. "What? Why?" "Your mother stopped sending money. No reason to keep you here," she said bluntly, sipping her coffee as if we were discussing something trivial. A cold dread settled in my stomach. "So it happens to me now," she shrugged dismissively. "Not my problem. You can go live with your grandmother. If she won't take you, then it's the orphanage." The thought of going to an orphanage terrified me, but the mention of Grandma sparked a small flicker of hope. I hadn't seen her since I was little and barely remembered her, but surely she wouldn't turn me away. Would she? Packing my bags felt surreal, like it was happening to someone else. I was packing up my life at Aunt Joyce's, each item a reminder of the year I'd lost. Aunt Joyce drove me to Grandma's house, and the car ride was silent except for the hum of the engine. When we arrived, the house was smaller and cozier than Aunt Joyce's big, imposing place. Grandma was waiting at the door, her expression unreadable. "This is Grace, your granddaughter," Aunt Joyce said, not bothering with any pleasantries. "I can't keep her anymore. Linda stopped paying." Grandma looked me over, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "I see. Come in, Grace." Aunt Joyce didn't stay long. With a brief nod, she left, her duty to me discarded as easily as she had gotten rid of me. Inside, Grandma's house was warm and filled with the scent of cinnamon and something sweet baking. It felt welcoming, a stark contrast to Aunt Joyce's cold, sterile environment. "You'll be staying in the guest room. I suppose we'll need to sort out some more permanent arrangements," Grandma said as she led me down the hall. The guest room was small, with a window overlooking the garden. It felt safe, a feeling I hadn't associated with a place in a long time. "Thank you, Grandma," I said quietly, still unsure of my welcome. She nodded. "We're family, Grace. You belong here more than anywhere else." Over the next few weeks, I adjusted to life with Grandma. It was different. She was strict, but there was a kindness to her rules, a gentleness in her reprimands. "You need to do your chores, Grace." "Everyone contributes here," she would remind me, but her tone was patient, not harsh. "Yes, Grandma," I would respond, grateful for her fair approach. Living with Grandma, I began to heal. I found comfort in the quiet routine of our days, the peaceful nights, and the steady rhythm of life that was so different from the chaos with Aunt Joyce. The months passed, and on my 19th birthday, Grandma made a decision that would change everything. Over breakfast, she slid an envelope across the table to me. "Take a look at this, Grace," she said, her voice carrying a mix of seriousness and warmth. I opened the envelope and pulled out some official-looking papers. What's this? It's adoption papers, Grace. I want to adopt you, make things official so no one can ever make you feel unwanted again, she explained, watching me closely for my reaction. I felt a lump in my throat. Really, Grandma? You mean it? Yes, I do. You're not just staying here, Grace. You're my family, and it's time we made that clear to everyone else, too. 2 weeks later, it was done. We went to court, and I officially became Grace Bennett, with a new sense of belonging that I had longed for since Mom sent me away. With Grandma's support, I finally felt like I was home. I began looking forward to the future, and Grandma encouraged me to focus on my studies, especially science, which had always fascinated me. You've got a sharp mind for it, Grace. You could go into medicine. How would you like that? She suggested one day as we were going over some of my school projects. I'd love that, Grandma. I want to help people, I replied, the idea starting to take root. Then it's settled. We'll get you into a good college program. I'll support you every step of the way, she declared with determination. True to her word, Grandma was there for me throughout my high school years. She tutored me in math and science using her old school methods that were strict but effective. You need to understand the basics, Grace. You can't skip the foundation, she'd insist whenever I struggled with complex problems. I graduated with top marks thanks to her unwavering support. Grandma then helped me navigate the daunting college application process. When I got accepted into a medical college with a partial scholarship, she was as proud as if she'd received the acceptance herself. We'll manage the finances. Don't you worry about that, Grandma said when I fretted over the costs. You focus on your studies and become the best doctor you can be. Medical school was tough but fulfilling. I was drawn to oncology, the branch of medicine that deals with cancer. It was hard, both emotionally and intellectually, but it felt right, like I was exactly where I needed to be. I completed my degree, then my internship, and finally my residency, each step a milestone that Grandma celebrated. You're making a real difference, Grace. I'm so proud of you, she'd say, her eyes shiny with pride. By the time I turned 30, I was fully established in my career as an oncologist. My life was busy but fulfilling, filled with long hours at the hospital and the satisfaction of knowing I was making a difference. Through it all, Grandma was my anchor, always there to listen and offer advice on tough days. But life, as it often does, threw another curveball my way. Grandma's health, which had been declining, took a sudden turn for the worse. It was swift and unexpected, the kind of decline that leaves you scrambling to catch your breath. I remember coming home one evening, tired after a particularly tough day at the hospital. Grandma was sitting in her favorite armchair looking out the window. Her voice was weaker when she called me over. Grace, come sit with me for a bit, she said, patting the chair next to her. I sat down and took her hand in mine. It felt fragile, like it could break with too much pressure. I'm not going to beat around the bush, she started, her tone serious. The doctors say there's not much time left. We need to talk about practical things. A lump formed in my throat as Grandma squeezed my hand. Her grip was strong even now, but I could see the weariness in her eyes. No tears now, Grace. We've got things to sort out. You need to be ready. Those words stayed with me as the next few weeks unfolded in a blur of doctor's visits, late nights, and legal paperwork. Grandma made sure everything was in place for me, ensuring there would be no complications with her estate or her wishes. When the end came, it was peaceful just as she had wanted. Grandma passed away in her sleep at home. The silence left by her passing was overwhelming, and the emptiness of the house felt unbearable at times. Planning the funeral was harder than I anticipated. Going through her address book, I called relatives and friends, but the responses were polite, distant, and few offered to come. It hurt, not just because I was losing Grandma, but because the farewell felt so lonely. The chapel was quieter than I expected, the rows of seats barely filled. I stood there, detached, as the priest spoke about life, loss, and legacy. It all felt so surreal, like a chapter I never imagined I'd have to face alone. It wasn't long after the funeral that the family I thought I'd left behind showed up, uninvited and unwelcome. My mother, stepfather, and their 21-year-old daughter arrived unannounced. My mother wasted no time. Grace, you need to share the inheritance your grandmother left you, she demanded, her tone entitled. I stared at them, disbelief and anger mixing in my chest. You left me, remember? 21 years ago, you decided I was too much of a burden. Her face twisted into a sneer. Ungrateful girl. Now you're a rich doctor with an inheritance. You owe us. I laughed bitterly. Grandma adopted me legally. You're nothing to me now. The shock on her face was almost comical. My stepfather leaned in, his voice low and menacing. You're going to regret this, Grace. I slammed the door behind them with satisfying finality. Standing there, my back against the door, I felt a strange mix of relief and renewed determination. A few days later, while I was at work, I received a call from a neighbor. Grace, it looks like your family's at your house again. They've been bringing in furniture. It looks like they're moving in. My stomach twisted. When I arrived home, seeing their car parked in front made me sick. I walked inside to find my mother, stepfather, and stepsister unpacking boxes in the living room, acting as though they had every right to be there. What are you doing? I demanded, my voice shaky but firm. My mother turned around, feigning surprise. Oh, Grace, we're just settling in. After all, this is family property. No, it's not, I said, my heart racing. This is my house, legally left to me by Grandma. You need to leave. My stepfather stepped forward with a smirk. Make us. We're family, and we deserve a part of this house. I could feel the anger rising inside me. You haven't been family for over 21 years. You can't just come here and claim what's mine. My stepsister, who had been silently watching, finally spoke. Come on, Grace, don't be so heartless. We're just asking for what's fair. Fair? I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. What's fair about abandoning a child? What's fair about showing up only when you think there's money to be had? They had no answers, just scowls and muttered curses. I'm calling the police, I said, pulling out my phone. My mother tried to stop me. You'll regret this, Grace, she shouted. I've regretted knowing you for years. This is nothing new, I shot back, dialing 911. 911. The police arrived quickly. I explained the situation, showing them the legal documents proving my ownership of the house and Grandma's will. The officers were firm. You need to leave, one told my mother and stepfather. This property doesn't belong to you. If you don't comply, you'll be removed forcibly. My stepfather glared at me, but there was nothing he could do. This isn't over, Grace, he threatened. Oh, but it is, I replied, my voice cold and final. After they left, I walked through the house, through Grandma's house. Each room was filled with memories, each corner a testament to her love and the life she had built for me. I stood in her favorite spot by the window, the sunlight streaming through, and made a promise not just to Grandma, but to myself. I wouldn't let the bitterness of the past dictate my future. I had fought hard to become who I was, and I would continue to fight to honor her legacy, the love she had shown me, and the sacrifices she had made. I was free, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. What do you do when the people who were supposed to love and protect you betray you instead? How do you move forward after years of neglect, rejection, and the weight of your past? For Grace, the road to healing was never easy. After being abandoned by her mother and sent to live with Aunt Joyce, it seemed like the cruelty of the world would never end. The harsh rules, the constant criticism, and the empty feeling of being unwanted made every day a struggle. But despite all the pain, Grace never gave up. She kept moving forward, even when it felt like she had nothing left. She had her own dreams, her own aspirations, and a fire in her heart that refused to be extinguished. When she found refuge with Grandma, things slowly began to change. Grandma's love and support were exactly what Grace needed to start rebuilding herself. With Grandma's unwavering belief in her, Grace went from a lost, hurt girl to a determined young woman who not only survived her circumstances but thrived. She went on to become a doctor, specializing in oncology, and dedicated her life to helping others just as her grandmother had helped her. But just when Grace thought the worst was behind her, her estranged mother and stepfather showed up at her door, demanding what they believed was their due. The anger, The audacity, they thought they could just waltz back into Grace's life because of money. But Grace had learned to stand up for herself. She had the courage to face her past head-on and the strength to protect what was hers, even if it meant confronting the family who had abandoned her. As the police escorted them out, Grace stood tall, a quiet smile on her face. "This is it," she thought. "I'm done being a victim. I'm finally free." What do you think? How would you have handled Grace's situation? Would you stand up to the family who hurt you, or would you try to move on in silence? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more stories of strength and resilience.
I never thought a piece of paper could change everything. But that's exactly what happened when I found the letter tucked inside my grandmother's old photo album. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon, and I was helping her organize decades of memories in her attic when it slipped out, a faded envelope with my name written on it in her elegant handwriting. My name is Zoe, and until that moment, I thought I understood my place in our family. I was wrong. "What's this, Grandma Evelyn?" I held up the envelope, watching her face carefully. The way her expression shifted told me this wasn't just another forgotten birthday card. "Oh dear," she said softly, setting down the stack of photos she'd been sorting. "I suppose you were bound to find that eventually." The letter was dated 3 years ago, right around the time my brother Ethan got engaged. I unfolded it, the paper crinkling beneath my trembling fingers. "Dearest Zoe," it began, "there are things you need to know about your parents' choices, particularly regarding your future. While they've set aside a considerable sum for Ethan's wedding and his future endeavors, I've discovered they've made no such provisions for you. This isn't right, and it's not your fault." My stomach dropped. I looked up at my grandmother, who was watching me with a mixture of sadness and determination in her eyes. "Keep reading," she encouraged quietly. "The money that was meant for your college fund, money I specifically set aside for you when you were born, has been redirected. Your father claims it's temporary, but I know better. There's more to this story than they're telling, and I fear it goes beyond simple favoritism." The words blurred as tears welled up in my eyes. I thought about all the times my mother had brushed off conversations about my future, how she changed the subject whenever I brought up college applications. Meanwhile, Ethan's wedding last summer had been an extravagant affair that had our whole town talking for months. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Grandma Evelyn reached across the space between us and took my hand. "Because you weren't ready then. But now, at 17, you're old enough to understand, and strong enough to do something about it." "Do what exactly?" I folded the letter carefully, trying to process what this meant. "That's up to you, sweetheart. But there's something else you should know." She hesitated, glancing toward the attic window. "Your father's explanation about where that money went. It doesn't add up. I've been doing some digging, and what I've found." The sound of car doors slamming interrupted her. Through the dusty window, I could see my parents pulling into the driveway. My mother's perfectly coiffed hair caught the sunlight as she stepped out, already calling my name. "Zoe, we need to get home. The Hendersons are coming over for dinner, and I need you to help set up." I looked at my grandmother, panic rising in my chest. "Assure you. For now, nothing." She tucked the letter into my jacket pocket. "Act normal. But come see me tomorrow after school. There's more you need to know, and we need to be careful about how we handle this." As I headed downstairs to meet my mother, my mind was racing. The perfect family image she worked so hard to maintain suddenly felt like a house of cards, ready to collapse at the slightest breeze. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I wanted to help keep it standing. "There you are." My mother's voice carried that familiar note of controlled irritation. "What were you doing up there all this time?" I forced a smile, feeling the weight of the letter in my pocket. "Just helping Grandma with some old photos." "Well, hurry up. We have appearances to maintain." If she only knew how much those words suddenly meant to me. Because now I understood, maintaining appearances was all that mattered to her, even at the cost of her daughter's future. And that realization changed everything. The Hendersons' visit was exactly what you'd expect. My mother fussing over perfectly arranged appetizers while my father talked business with Mr. Henderson. I couldn't stop thinking about the letter burning a hole in my jacket pocket, hanging in the mudroom. And how's Ethan doing at his new job? Mrs. Henderson asked, making my mother beam with pride. Oh, he's already being considered for a promotion. The youngest account manager they've ever had. My mother's voice dripped with satisfaction. We always knew he was destined for great things. I stabbed at my salad, pushing around a cherry tomato. Mom, I wanted to talk to you about college applications. Did you hear Ethan's thinking of buying a house? She continued, completely ignoring me. In that lovely new development near the country club. My father finally looked up from his conversation. Speaking of houses, we should tell them about the renovation plans, Linda. My fork clattered against my plate. Renovation plans? What about my college fund? The room went silent. My mother's smile froze, while my father suddenly became very interested in his water glass. Zoe, my mother said through clenched teeth, we can discuss this later. No, I said, surprising myself with my steadiness. I think we should discuss it now. Where's my college fund? Mrs. Henderson shifted uncomfortably in her chair. My mother's face flushed red. I think we should be going, Mr. Henderson said, standing up. Linda, Greg, thank you for dinner. After they left, my mother rounded on me. How dare you embarrass us like that? What's gotten into you? What's gotten into me? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I just found out you've spent my entire future on Ethan's wedding and now house renovations? That's not... My father started, but I cut him off. Not what, Dad? Not true. Because Grandma Evelyn seems to think differently. My mother's eyes narrowed. You've been talking to her about our family business? Someone had to tell me the truth. I was shouting now, years of being overlooked pouring out. Did you think I wouldn't notice? That I'd just quietly accept having no future while you throw money at Ethan? Your brother has earned everything he's gotten, my mother snapped. He works hard. He makes connections. He understands the importance of maintaining our family's position. Our position? I gestured around our perfectly decorated dining room. Is that all you care about? How things look? Enough. My father's voice boomed, making us both jump. Zoe, go to your room. We'll discuss this when everyone's calmer. There's nothing to discuss, I said, pushing back from the table. You've made your choices pretty clear. As I headed for the stairs, my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Mom says you're causing drama again. Grow up, sis. I typed back, how's that promotion coming along? The one you told Mom about 3 months ago. His response was immediate. Don't you dare. I smiled, feeling a strange sense of power. My perfect brother wasn't so perfect after all. I'd overheard him drunk dialing his ex last week, crying about how he was about to be fired. But, of course, our parents didn't know that. In my room, I pulled out the letter again, reading it for the 10th time. There was something else here, something bigger than just favoritism. Grandma Evelyn's words about my father's explanation not adding up nagged at me. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Grandma Evelyn. Are you okay? Remember, tomorrow after school. There's more you need to know. I heard my parents arguing downstairs, their voices carrying through the heating vent. We have to tell her something, Linda. We tell her nothing. She's just being dramatic. Once the renovations are done and we host the charity gala, everything will be fine. And when she can't go to college, when she figures out what really happened to the money, she won't. No one will. We've worked too hard to maintain this life, Greg. I won't let her ruin everything. I recorded their conversation on my phone, my hands shaking. Whatever they were hiding, whatever they'd done with my future, I was going to find out. And when I did, maintaining appearances would be the least of their worries. I barely slept that night, and the next day crawled by until I could finally get to Grandma Evelyn's house. When I arrived, I found her in her study, surrounded by stacks of papers and old financial documents. Lock the door, she said without looking up. I'd never seen her so serious. What's going on, Grandma? I dropped my backpack and sat across from her desk. She slid a folder toward me. Your father came to me 5 years ago, asking to borrow against your college fund. He said it was temporary, just until some investments paid off. She paused, her hands trembling slightly. I should have known better. Inside the folder were bank statements, transfer records, and a handwritten agreement between my father and grandmother. But what caught my eye was a newspaper clipping dated 3 years ago. Local investment firm under investigation for fraud. Dad worked there, I whispered, pieces starting to click into place. He did more than work there, Zoe. He was involved in the fraud. The investigation was quietly settled, but it cost him everything, including your future. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Dad's looking for his old work files. Did you take anything from his office? I ignored it, my heart pounding. The renovation money isn't for renovations, Grandma Evelyn confirmed. Your parents are underwater on the mortgage. They're trying to sell before the bank forecloses. The perfect family image shattered completely. And Ethan's wedding? His new house. Smoke and mirrors. Your brother's about to lose his job, but your mother's too proud to admit any of this. She reached for my hand. There's something else. Your father. The study door rattled. Mom? Are you in there? My father's voice sent ice through my veins. Grandma Evelyn quickly swept the papers into a drawer. Just a minute, Greg. She turned to me, speaking rapidly. There's a USB drive in my bedroom, top drawer of my jewelry box. Get it while I distract him. It has everything you need to know. I slipped out through the connecting door to her bedroom, just as she opened the study. My father's voice drifted through the wall. Is Zoe here? Her car's outside. She was, but she left something at school. She'll be back soon. I found the USB drive buried under vintage brooches and quickly pocketed it. Through the crack in the door, I could see my father pacing. Did you tell her anything? About what, Greg? About how you gambled away her future. Or about the other thing? Mother, please. Don't mother me. You made your choices. Now Zoe gets to make hers. I heard drawers opening in the study. Where are the documents? Safe, Grandma Evelyn said firmly. Where you can't destroy them like you did everything else. My phone buzzed again. This time from my mother. Come home immediately. We need to talk about your behavior. Another text followed. Your father knows you took something from his office. Return it now, and we'll forget this happened. But I hadn't taken anything yet. They were scared of what I might find, which meant there was definitely something to find. I heard my father's footsteps heading toward the bedroom. Heart racing, I slipped into the ensuite bathroom, then out through its second door into the hallway. As I crept down the stairs, I heard him calling my name. Zoe? I know you're here somewhere. My grandmother's voice rang out, sharp and clear. Leave her alone, Greg. Haven't you done enough damage? I made it to my car, hands shaking as I started the engine. In my rearview mirror, I saw my father emerge from the house, phone to his ear, probably calling my mother. The USB drive felt heavy in my pocket as I drove away. Whatever was on it had my father spooked enough to come looking for it. And now I had something they wanted, leverage. My phone kept buzzing with texts and calls, but I ignored them all. Instead, I pulled into the library parking lot and took out my laptop. It was time to find out what other secrets my family was hiding and why they were so desperate to keep me from discovering the truth. The files on the USB drive made my stomach turn. Bank statements, emails, and documents revealed a web of lies stretching back years. My father hadn't just been involved in the investment fraud, he'd orchestrated it. And the victims? Mostly elderly clients who'd trusted him with their life savings, including my grandmother. My hands shook as I scrolled through an email thread between my parents from 3 years ago. Evelyn knows too much. We need to handle this carefully. Dad, just keep her happy. The wedding will distract everyone. Mom. The library's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I connected more dots. My brother's lavish wedding, the house renovations, even his supposed new job, all elaborate distractions to keep people from looking too closely at our family's finances. My phone lit up with a text from Ethan. Whatever you think you know, you're wrong. Come home and we can fix this. I typed back, fix what? The fraud? Or just the appearance of it? His response came quickly. You don't understand what's at stake. But I did. I understood perfectly now. The library door opened, and I quickly closed my laptop. My mother walked in, scanning the room until she spotted me. Her heels clicked against the floor as she approached, drawing disapproving looks from other patrons. Get your things, she whispered. We're going home. I didn't move. Why? So you can help Dad hide more evidence. Her perfectly composed face cracked slightly. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Your father stole from his own mother-in-law? I kept my voice low but steady. Used my college fund to cover his tracks? She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging in. There are people watching us, Zoe. Important people. If this gets out. You mean if people find out we're not actually perfect? I pulled away from her grip. That's what really scares you, isn't it? Not what Dad did, but what the neighbors might think. You ungrateful little, she caught herself, forcing a smile as someone walked past. Your father made mistakes, yes. But everything he did for this family. No, I said, standing up. He did it for himself. And you helped him. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Grandma Evelyn. Don't go home. Come to me. It's time you knew everything. My mother saw the message. Your grandmother is manipulating you. She's bitter because Dad stole her retirement? I shouldered my backpack. Or because you helped him cover it up? If you leave now, she hissed, don't bother coming back. I looked at her, really looked at her. The expensive clothes, the perfect makeup, the desperate need to maintain appearances. It all seemed so hollow now. Okay, I said simply and walked away. Zoe, she called after me, loud enough to make people turn. Zoe, stop this right now. But I kept walking. In my car, I found more messages from Ethan. Mom's freaking out. Dad's talking about leaving town. Whatever Grandma told you, there's more to the story. I started the engine, then hesitated. One final message popped up, this one from my father. I can explain everything. Meet me at the country club. Just you and me. No police. Police? I hadn't even thought about that yet. But now that he mentioned it, I pulled out of the parking lot, my mind racing. The country club was in the opposite direction from Grandma Evelyn's house. Dad was probably there already, waiting to charm or threaten me into silence. Mom was probably calling everyone in her social circle, spinning some story about my rebellious phase. And Ethan? For the first time, I wondered how much he really knew. How long he'd been helping them maintain their perfect family facade. I turned toward Grandma Evelyn's house, but not before making a quick stop. Those files needed to be somewhere safe, somewhere my family couldn't reach them. Because now I understood, this wasn't just about my future anymore. It was about justice for everyone they'd hurt along the way. I arrived at Grandma Evelyn's house to find Ethan's car already in the driveway. My stomach dropped. He'd beaten me here. Through the living room window, I could see him gesturing animatedly while Grandma sat calmly in her armchair, arms crossed. Taking a deep breath, I walked in through the unlocked door. Just need to make this go away, Ethan was saying. We can figure something out that works for everyone. Like you figured something out for all those retirees Dad swindled? I asked, making him spin around. Zoe. His usual confident smile looked strained. You don't understand what's happening here. I understand perfectly. I pulled out my phone, showing him the recording from the USB drive. Want to hear Dad explain to his business partner how they could redistribute Grandma's retirement fund? Ethan's face went pale. Where did you get that? Does it matter? What matters is what's on it. I turned to Grandma Evelyn. Did you know Ethan was helping them cover it up? Of course I knew, she said quietly. Just like I knew your father was planning to leave the country tonight. That hit me like a punch to the gut. What? He's already gone, hasn't he? She asked Ethan, who wouldn't meet her eyes. That's why you're here, damage control. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Your father loves you. Remember that when you hear what people say about him. You knew, I said to Ethan, pieces clicking into place. You knew all along. The fake job, the wedding expenses, everything. It was all to help Dad hide the money. I was protecting our family, he snapped. Someone had to, and you were too busy feeling sorry for yourself to see the bigger picture. The bigger picture? Grandma Evelyn stood up, her voice sharp. The bigger picture is that your father stole from people who trusted him. People who lost everything while you had your fancy wedding and your mother planned her charity galas. My phone kept buzzing. Texts from Mom about family loyalty, about keeping secrets, about appearances. I turned it off. What do you want? Ethan asked me, his voice low. Money? I can get you money for college. Just delete those files and forget about all of this. I laughed, but it came out more like a sob. You still don't get it. This isn't about money anymore. Then what is it about? He threw up his hands. Revenge? You want to destroy our family because Mom and Dad played favorites. No, Grandma Evelyn answered for me. It's about justice. For everyone your father hurt. Including your sister. Ethan's phone rang Mom's ringtone. He ignored it. If those files get out, we lose everything. The house, our reputation, everything Mom and Dad worked for. You mean stole for, I corrected. Fine, he shouted. Yes, Dad stole the money. Yes, I helped cover it up. Yes, Mom spent your college fund on my wedding to keep up appearances. Is that what you wanted to hear? The front door opened. Mom stood there, mascara smeared from crying. Thoy, blessy. Whatever you're thinking of doing. I already did it, I said quietly. I sent copies of everything to the police. And the newspapers. And Dad's old clients. The color drained from her face. You didn't. I did. Abota no rago. My voice was steady despite my shaking hands. Right after I found out Dad was planning to run. Ethan lunged for my phone, but Grandma Evelyn stepped between us. It's done, she said firmly. The truth is out. Now we all have to live with it. Mom sank into a chair, her perfect posture finally breaking. How could you do this to us? How could you do this to me? I countered. To Grandma? To all those people who trusted Dad. The sound of police sirens in the distance made Ethan curse. Mom started crying in earnest. But all I felt was a strange sense of peace. I'm staying here with Grandma, I announced. You two can go home and wait for the police. Or run like Dad did. Your choice. As they left, Mom still crying, Ethan silent for once, Grandma Evelyn squeezed my hand. Are you okay? I watched through the window as their cars pulled away. No, I admitted. But I will be. The news broke faster than I expected. By morning, our family's face was plastered across every local news site. Prominent financial advisor flees country amid fraud allegations. Below the headlines were photos from Ethan's wedding, our perfect family smile now looking more like a grimace. My phone hadn't stopped ringing since dawn. Former family friends, reporters, even Dad's old clients wanting to know if I knew where he'd hidden their money. I didn't have any answers for them. You should eat something, Grandma Evelyn said, setting a plate of toast beside me. I'd been staring at my laptop for hours, watching our family's carefully constructed image crumble in real time. Ethan lost his job, I said, scrolling through another news article. Mom's being questioned by the police. They froze all their accounts. Good. Is it? I looked up at her. I wanted justice, but now, people are saying horrible things about us online. Former friends are calling us criminals. Even people who weren't involved are suffering. The doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Ethan on the porch, looking nothing like the golden child I grew up with. His designer clothes were wrinkled, his hair uncombed. I'll handle this, Grandma Evelyn said, but I stopped her. No, I need to. When I opened the door, Ethan didn't wait for an invitation. They're selling the house, he blurted out. Mom's being evicted. All my accounts are frozen. I can't even buy groceries. Welcome to my world, I said, but the satisfaction I'd expected to feel didn't come. Is that what you wanted? His voice cracked. To destroy everything? You destroyed it yourselves. I just exposerat det trut. Det trot. He laughed bitterly. The truth is Dad's gone. Mom's having a breakdown. Our family name is ruined. And for what? So you could get revenge. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a news alert. My heart stopped when I saw the headline, breaking, Greg Caldwell found dead in Mexico hotel room. The world tilted sideways. Ethan grabbed my phone, his face draining of color as he read. Apparent suicide, he whispered. He left a note. I stumbled backward, hitting the wall. This wasn't supposed to happen. I wanted justice, not this. Are you happy now? Ethan's voice was hollow. You got what you wanted. Dad's dead, Mom's probably going to jail, and I'm sleeping in my car because they froze my accounts. You didn't. The word stuck in my throat. I never meant. But you did it anyway. He tossed my phone back to me. Congratulations, Zoe. You're not the forgotten child anymore. You're the one who destroyed the Caldwell family. He left before I could respond, the door slamming behind him. I slid down the wall, my legs giving out. Grandma Evelyn appeared beside me, her face grave. This isn't your fault, isn't it? My voice sounded strange, distant. I wanted them to pay for what they did to us. But now Dad's dead, Mom's facing charges, and Ethan's homeless. How is that justice? Your father made his choices long before you exposed them, she said firmly. What happened after is on him, not you. But as I sat there, reading the news coverage of my father's death, I wasn't so sure. The revenge I'd wanted now felt hollow, tainted. I'd won, but at what cost? My phone lit up with another call, Mom's number. Her contact photo showed us at Ethan's wedding, both smiling, both pretending everything was perfect. I let it ring. What do I do now? I asked Grandma Evelyn, feeling more lost than ever. She didn't answer immediately, and when she did, her words weren't what I expected. Sometimes, destroying something broken is the only way to rebuild it properly. But as police sirens wailed in the distance, heading toward what used to be my home, I wondered if anything could ever be rebuilt from these ashes. And more importantly, if it should be. A week after Dad's death, I found myself standing in our old house, watching Mom pack up her designer clothes for court-ordered liquidation. The grand staircase where we'd taken so many perfect family photos now felt like a monument to lies. They're letting me keep one suitcase, she said, not looking at me. Everything else goes to the victims' fund. I picked up a framed photo from her dresser, Ethan's graduation. Where is he? Living in his car, last I heard. She folded a silk blouse with trembling hands. Though he won't answer my calls anymore either. Mom, don't. She finally turned to face me. Don't pretend you care now. You got what you wanted. We're ruined. Your father's dead. Justice served, right? Before I could respond, the front door slammed. Ethan's voice echoed up the stairs. Mom, you need to see this. He burst into the room, waving papers. His eyes narrowed when he saw me. What's she doing here? What's wrong? Mom asked. Dad's suicide note? It wasn't suicide. He thrust the papers at us. The police found evidence in his hotel room. He was murdered. The world tilted sideways. What? Someone followed him to Mexico, Ethan continued. Someone who lost everything in his investment scheme. They found emails threatening him, saying they'd make him pay. Mom snatched the papers, her face going pale. But that means... It means Zoe's little revenge plot got Dad killed, Ethan spat. How does that feel, sis? Still feel like justice. I grabbed the papers, scanning them quickly. These threats, they're dated before I exposed anything. Before I even knew about the fraud. Because Dad knew it was coming, Mom whispered. He knew they were closing in. That's why he... She trailed off, realization dawning in her eyes. Why he what? I demanded. Why he transferred everything to my name, she said quietly. The house, the accounts. He made me complicit to protect himself. Ethan's phone buzzed. His face went ashen as he read the message. The police found more documents in Dad's room. Records of other schemes going back years. Names, dates. Mom, your name is all over them. Because he set me up, she breathed. He knew. He knew they were coming for him, so he made sure I'd take the fall. The perfect family facade cracked completely. Mom sank onto her bed, decades of denial crumbling. Ifut. I thought if we just kept up appearances, everything would be fine. If we just looked perfect. While I paid the price, I said. Me and Grandma Evelyn and all those other people. I'm sorry, she whispered, and for the first time in my life, I believed her. I was so worried about how we looked that I couldn't see what we'd become. Ethan slumped against the wall. So what do we do now? I pulled out my phone, showing them the email I'd received that morning. I got into art school. Full scholarship for photography. How? Ethan asked. My portfolio. Pictures of our perfect family falling apart. The judges called it a raw exploration of facade versus reality. Mom let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. Using our destruction to build your future. That's fitting. Maybe that's all we can do now, I said. Stop pretending. Start over. Build something real for once. Ethan straightened up. You got the job offer. Nothing fancy, just bartending. But it's honest work. And I'm pleading guilty, Mom added quietly. No more hiding. We stood there in the ruins of our perfect life, 3 survivors of a disaster of our own making. The revenge I'd wanted had turned into something else entirely, not justice exactly, but truth. Painful, necessary truth. We're not going to be okay for a while, I said finally. But maybe we can be real. Mom nodded, tears streaming down her face. Real is better than perfect. Through the window, I could see the auction signs going up in our front yard. The end of one story, maybe, but also the beginning of another. 6 months later, I stood in a small gallery, surrounded by black and white photographs. My first exhibition, Facades, was drawing to a close. The images told our story. The perfect family photos juxtaposed with the aftermath of our collapse, empty rooms in our old house, Mom in her prison jumpsuit, Ethan sleeping in his car. It's brutal, a voice said behind me. I turned to find Ethan, looking different in his bartender's uniform, but honest. Thanks for letting me use the photos. He shrugged, hands in his pockets. Least I could do after everything. We stood before the centerpiece, a split image. On one side, our family at his wedding. On the other, the 4 empty chairs at Mom's sentencing. 3 years, he said quietly. Could have been worse. She took responsibility. Finally, I adjusted the frame slightly. Have you visited? Once. She looks different. Smaller, without all the designer clothes and makeup. But more real somehow. Grandma Evelyn appeared beside us, leaning on her cane. Your mother called yesterday. She's teaching other inmates about financial literacy, trying to help them avoid the mistakes she made. Ironic, Ethan muttered. Or fitting, I countered. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find your purpose. A young woman approached us, notebook in hand. Miss Caldwell? I'm from the university paper. Would you say your work is about revenge? Getting back at your family. Before I could answer, another voice cut in. It's about truth. We all turned. Mom stood there in simple clothes, her hair unstyled, a guard discreetly waiting by the door. She'd been granted temporary release for the exhibition. Mom. Ethan stepped forward, then stopped, unsure. The court approved a few hours, she explained. I needed to see this, to see what we really were. She moved through the gallery, studying each photo. Stopping at one of Dad's empty office, she touched the frame gently. He never would have changed, would he? No, Grandma Evelyn said firmly. But you did. Mom turned to me, her eyes wet. Your father died running from the truth. I'm leaving Quifet. It's harder, but better. Why did you come? I asked. Because this, she gestured to the photos, isn't about revenge anymore. It's about rebuilding. And I wanted to be part of that, even if just for a moment. Ethan cleared his throat. I got promoted to head bartender. Small steps, but honest ones, Mom finished, smiling slightly. The gallery was closing. The guard approached, indicating it was time. Mom hugged Ethan awkwardly, then turned to me. I'm proud of you, she said. Not for destroying our facade, but for building something real from the ruins. After she left, I sold the final photograph, the empty chairs at her sentencing. The buyer, an art collector, asked what the piece meant. It's about absence, I said, but also presence. Sometimes what's missing shows you what matters most. Later that night, at Grandma Evelyn's house, my home now, I found a letter from Mom. Inside was a familiar photo, me at age 5, before the perfect family facade took over. On the back she'd written, keep showing the truth. It hurts, but it heals. I pinned it to my wall, next to my art school acceptance letter and the newspaper clipping about Dad's death. Not as trophies of revenge, but as reminders that sometimes justice comes in unexpected ways. Ethan texted me later. Mom looked good. Different, but good. Maybe we all needed to fall apart to put ourselves back together, right? I thought about responding, but instead just looked out my window at the night sky. The perfect family was gone, but something more authentic was taking its place. Not whole yet, maybe never would be, but real. And real, I learned, was better than perfect any day. I never thought my life would unravel because of a piece of paper, but that's exactly what happened on a random Tuesday in March. The letter was sitting on my desk when I arrived at the bakery, tucked beneath a stack of invoices I'd left to process the night before. My name is Mallory, and until that morning, I thought I had everything figured out. The family bakery my brother Ethan and I ran was thriving. My marriage to Luke was comfortable, if not exactly passionate. And I had finally mastered our grandmother's impossible-to-replicate chocolate croissant recipe. But that letter changed everything. Someone close to you isn't who they appear to be. Watch the numbers. They don't lie. The message was typed and signed except for a single L at the bottom. My first thought was that it was a joke, maybe one of our employees playing a prank. But something about it made my stomach twist. I was still staring at it when Ethan walked in, carrying the scent of fresh bread and coffee with him. "Earth to Mal," he said, waving his hand in front of my face. "The morning rush starts in 20, and you're sitting here like you've seen a ghost." I quickly folded the letter and shoved it into my pocket. "Just reviewing these invoices," I lied, forcing a smile. Ethan gave me that big brother look he's perfected over the years, the one that says he knows I'm full of it but won't push. "Well, while you're reviewing things, maybe take a look at the new numbers Izzy put together. Something feels off about them." He dropped another stack of papers on my desk. "Izzy, our new finance director. Luke had recommended her for the position 6 months ago, swearing by her credentials. She was good at her job, maybe too good. Every time I tried to review her work, she had a perfectly reasonable explanation for any discrepancy I found. I'll check them today, I promised, but my mind was already spinning. The letter. The numbers. Watch the numbers. The morning rush kept me busy enough to push aside my worries, but they came flooding back when Luke texted to say he'd be working late again. 3rd time this week. I typed and deleted several responses before settling on a simple okay. That evening, after the last customer left and Ethan headed home, I stayed behind to look at those numbers Izzy had prepared. Really look at them this time. 2 hours later, my eyes were burning, but I'd found something. Small discrepancies, carefully hidden in routine transactions. Individually, they were nothing. Together, they painted a disturbing picture. My phone buzzed. "Luke again. Don't wait up." Big story breaking. I stared at his message, thinking about all his late nights lately, about how he'd pushed for Izzy's hiring, about how distant he'd been. The pieces were there, but I couldn't, or wouldn't, put them together. The bell above the front door chimed, making me jump. "Sorry, we're closed." I called out, but footsteps were already approaching my office. Izzy appeared in the doorway, her usually perfect appearance slightly disheveled. She stopped short when she saw me surrounded by financial reports. Something flickered across her face. Surprise? Fear? Before her professional mask slipped back into place. "Mallory, I didn't expect anyone to still be here," she said, smoothing her skirt. "I just forgot my phone charger." I watched her retrieve it from her desk, noting how her hands trembled slightly. "Everything okay, Izzy?" "Of course," she replied too quickly. "Just tired. Big project, you know how it is." As she hurried out, I noticed something fall from her purse, a receipt from the Grand Hotel downtown. The same hotel where Luke said he was meeting his sources for his latest story. I picked up the receipt with shaking hands, and suddenly the letter's warning felt less like a mystery and more like a ticking bomb. Whatever was happening, I had a feeling my comfortable life was about to explode. That night, I made 2 decisions. I would hire a private investigator. And I wouldn't tell anyone, not even Ethan, until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones you need to watch the most carefully. The next morning, I couldn't look Luke in the eye as he rushed through breakfast, claiming another early meeting. I watched him dump his coffee in the sink, barely touched, and noticed how he checked his phone 3 times in 2 minutes. When had this become our normal? "You're working too hard," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Maybe we should take that weekend trip to the coast we talked about?" Luke paused at the door, his hand already on the handle. "Can't right now, Mel. Big story breaking. Maybe next month?" He was gone before I could respond, leaving behind only the fading scent of his cologne and another hollow promise. At the bakery, Ethan was already in full swing, charming the morning regulars with his usual easy banter. but I caught him watching Izzy through the office window, his smile fading whenever she walked past. "Something's not right with the new contracts," he said later, cornering me in the storage room. "Luke's friend isn't as brilliant as he claimed." I nearly dropped the bag of flour I was holding. "What do you mean?" "Izzy's restructured our supplier agreements. Says it'll save us money, but—" He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit from childhood. "The terms are weird, Mal. Like they're designed to fail." Before I could respond, Izzy appeared in the doorway. "Oh, sorry to interrupt," she said, though her expression suggested she wasn't sorry at all. "Mallory, could you sign these? They need to go out today." She held out a stack of papers. "I'll look them over first," I said. Something flickered in her eyes. "They're time-sensitive. Luke said you'd be fine with them." "Luke doesn't run this bakery," Ethan cut in, his voice sharp. "We do." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with one of our bread knives. Izzy's perfectly maintained smile cracked just slightly before she recovered. "Of course. Take your time." She turned on her heel and left. "Since when does Luke approve our paperwork?" Ethan asked quietly. I shook my head, remembering the hotel receipt. "I need to tell you something," I started, but my phone buzzed. A text from Luke, working late again. "Don't wait up." Ethan read the message over my shoulder and made a disgusted sound. "You know what? I know a guy. Private investigator. Used him when I thought Jenny was cheating during my divorce." "Was she?" "No. But at least I knew for sure." He squeezed my shoulder. "Sometimes it's better to know, Mal, even if the truth hurts." That evening, I stayed late again, digging deeper into our accounts. The numbers were like a puzzle where all the pieces looked right but created the wrong picture. Small discrepancies, clever redirections, all pointing to something bigger. I was so absorbed that I didn't hear Luke come in until he spoke from the doorway. "You're working too hard." I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Jesus, Luke. What are you doing here? Can't a husband surprise his wife?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Brought you dinner." He held up a bag from my favorite restaurant. As he set up the food on my desk, I noticed a smudge of lipstick on his collar, coral pink. The same shade Izzy wore. My stomach churned. "Actually, I'm not hungry," I said. "And I have a lot of work to finish." "Come on, Mal. When did you become so distant?" The irony of his words hit me like a slap. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to ask about the lipstick and the hotel and all the late nights. Instead, I said, "I could ask you the same thing." He stiffened, then checked his phone. Again. "Look, if you're going to be difficult, I'll just go. Some of us have real work to do, not just playing with family recipes in a bakery." The dismissive tone, the subtle dig at the business my grandparents had built, something snapped inside me. "Yes," I said coldly. "You should go. I'm sure your work is waiting." After he left, I pulled out the business card Ethan had slipped me earlier. Marcus Lee, private investigator. My hands shook as I dialed the number, but my voice was steady when I spoke. "I need your help uncovering the truth about my husband." Marcus Lee's office smelled like old coffee and resignation. He sat across from me, methodically spreading surveillance photos across his desk like he was dealing cards in a game I was already losing. 3 weeks of observation, he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Your husband and Miss Green meet at the Grand Hotel every Tuesday and Thursday. Always room 412. He slid another photo forward, Luke and Izzy entering the elevator together, his hand on the small of her back. The timestamp showed 2:14 p.m. last Tuesday, right when he'd texted me about his breaking story. My throat felt like I'd swallowed ground glass. "The meetings? How long?" "Usually 2 hours." Marcus hesitated. But that's not the worst part. He pulled out financial records, bank statements, transfer receipts. The numbers danced before my eyes, but even through my shock, I could see the pattern. Money moving between accounts, small amounts that added up to something massive. "They're bleeding your bakery dry," Marcus said. "Slowly, carefully, but it's happening." "The new supplier contracts?" "They're funneling money through shell companies. Your husband's name is on all of them." The room tilted sideways. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles white. "How much?" Close to 200,000 so far. They're good at hiding it. A knock at the door made me jump. Marcus's assistant poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here asking for Mrs. Jennings. Says it's urgent. Ethan burst in before she finished speaking. His face was flushed, eyes wild. Mal, thank God. You need to get back to the bakery. Now. What's wrong? Luke showed up with some guys in suits. They're doing an audit. Said it's standard procedure, but they're going through everything. Izzy's helping them. My stomach dropped. The photos were still spread across Marcus's desk, damning evidence of both personal and professional betrayal. I gathered them quickly, shoving them into my bag. They're trying to cover their tracks, Marcus said, standing. Or worse, they're setting up a paper trail to blame someone else. The drive back to the bakery was a blur. When we arrived, the morning rush had slowed to a trickle, and 3 men in expensive suits were camped out in our office. Luke stood by the door, arms crossed, looking every bit the concerned husband. Mal, where have you been? He asked, reaching for me. I stepped back, my skin crawling. These gentlemen are helping us identify some irregularities in our books. Irregularities? I kept my voice steady, though my heart was hammering. Like the shell companies you've been using to steal from us? The color drained from his face. Behind him, Izzy dropped the file she was holding, papers scattering across the floor. I don't know what you're talking about, Luke said, but his eyes darted to Izzy, who was frantically gathering the fallen documents. Room 412, I said quietly. Every Tuesday and Thursday. The silence that followed was deafening. One of the suits cleared his throat. Perhaps we should continue this another time. No, I said, pulling out the photos and financial records. Let's continue right now. I'm sure these gentlemen would be very interested in seeing exactly where our money's been going. Luke's charm vanished like smoke. You had me followed? His voice was ugly, dangerous. You really want to do this here, Mal? In front of everyone. Better than doing it behind my back, like you've been doing everything else. Izzy suddenly straightened, her face set. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she said. Luke promised no one would get hurt. Shut up, Luke snapped, but Izzy kept talking. He said it was just business, that the bakery could afford it. But then he wanted more and more and… Luke moved toward her, but Ethan was faster, stepping between them. Touch her, and you'll regret it. The suits were packing up their briefcases, looking uncomfortable. One of them paused at the door. Mrs. Jennings, you might want to contact your lawyer. Soon. I watched them leave, then turned back to my husband, the stranger I'd shared my life with. How long were you planning this? His laugh was hollow. Since the day your brother made it clear I'd never have a real place here. It's always been about the precious family bakery, hasn't it? Well, now it's about survival. Let's see how well your family legacy holds up in court. The threat hung in the air like poison, and I realized this was just the beginning of a war I never wanted to fight. The morning after the confrontation, I found our bakery's front window smashed. Shards of glass glittered on the sidewalk like cruel confetti, and spray-painted across our storefront in angry red letters was one word: liar. Ethan arrived while I was still staring at the damage. I've called the police, he said, putting an arm around my shoulders. Security cameras caught everything. It was Luke. Of course it was. My husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, had always been dramatic when cornered. But this felt different. Desperate. Inside, while waiting for the police, I discovered my office had been ransacked. Files were missing, my computer screen cracked. But strangest of all was what had been left behind, a framed photo from our opening day 5 years ago, showing Luke, Ethan, and me cutting the ribbon. The glass was broken, and Luke's face had been carefully scratched out. Mrs. Jennings? A quiet voice made me turn. Izzy stood in the doorway, looking smaller somehow without her usual professional armor. I need to tell you something. About Luke. About everything. Before she could continue, Marcus appeared behind her. Maybe we should all talk somewhere more private. We gathered in the back office. Me, Ethan, Marcus, and Izzy. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting strange shadows across our faces as Izzy began to speak. Luke didn't start this, she said. hands trembling around a cup of untouched coffee. He was recruited. There's someone else, someone bigger behind it all. Who? Ethan demanded. James Morrison. The name hit me like a physical blow. James, our father's oldest friend, the man who'd helped us secure the loans to buy this place after Dad died. He'd been like a second father to us. That's impossible, Ethan said, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. Izzy pulled out her phone, played a recording. Luke's voice filled the room. James says if we do this right, everyone wins. The bakery goes under, he buys it cheap, develops the property. We get our cut, and the Jennings siblings learn a hard lesson about family loyalty. My stomach churned. Why are you showing us this now? Because Luke's spiraling, Izzy whispered. He wanted to hurt you, yes, but James? He wants to destroy everything your family built. And after last night, she swallowed hard. Luke called James in a panic. I heard him say that if the bakery won't go down quietly, there are other ways to force a sale. Marcus leaned forward. Like what? Health code violations. Food poisoning allegations. Anonymous tips about tax fraud. They're planning to hit you from every angle until you're forced to sell. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of police radios outside. I looked at the damaged photo again, at Luke's scratched-out face, and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was war. Why should we trust you? Ethan asked Izzy. She pulled out a USB drive. Because I've been copying everything. Every transaction, every email, every meeting recording. I thought I was part of something legitimate at first. By the time I realized the truth, Luke had already implicated me in enough illegal activities to ruin my life. Marcus took the drive, studied it. This could help. But they'll know you turned on them. I know, Izzy said quietly. That's why I'm leaving town tonight. But first, there's something else you need to know. The anniversary celebration next week? James and Luke are planning to use it to announce their new development project. They're going to humiliate you in front of everyone who matters in this town. I stood up, walked to the window. Outside, customers were already gathering, drawn by the police presence and the vandalism. Our loyal customers, our community. The people who'd supported us through everything. No, I said, turning back to face them. They're not going to humiliate us. Because we're going to be ready for them. Ethan's eyes met mine, and I saw the same determination there. What are you thinking, Mal? I'm thinking it's time to show James and Luke what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. I looked at Marcus. Can you help us set a trap? He nodded slowly. With Izzy's evidence and the right timing. Yes, but it's risky. So is destroying someone's life, I said, picking up the broken photo. They should have remembered that before they started this game. 3 days before the anniversary celebration, I found James Morrison sitting in our kitchen, drinking coffee with Luke like nothing had changed. Like they hadn't tried to destroy everything my family had built. Mallory, James said warmly, standing to embrace me. I let his arms wrap around me, fighting the urge to recoil. We've been discussing solutions to this unfortunate situation. I caught Luke's eye over James's shoulder. My husband looked exhausted, haunted even, but there was something else there, a glimmer of triumph that made my skin crawl. Solutions? I kept my voice neutral, remembering Marcus's warning, let them think they're winning. The development project could save this neighborhood, James said, settling back into his chair. Your parents would have understood that sometimes progress requires sacrifice. The casual mention of my parents sent a surge of rage through me, but I forced myself to sit down. Tell me about this project. As James launched into his pitch about luxury condos and boutique retail spaces, I noticed Luke's hands trembling slightly around his coffee cup. He'd always been a terrible liar when cornered. We're prepared to be generous, James continued. Above market value for the property, plus a consulting position for both you and Ethan in the new development. How long have you been planning this? I asked, watching Luke flinch at the question. James's smile never wavered. Sometimes opportunities present themselves at unexpected moments. Luke mentioned your financial struggles, which you engineered. I cut in, unable to help myself. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. James's smile turned sharp. Careful, Mallory. Accusations like that could be problematic, especially given the recent health code complaints. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Documents secured. Health inspector confirms attempted bribe. Moving to phase 2. I need time to think, I said, standing up. And to discuss this with Ethan. Of course, James replied smoothly. But don't take too long. These opportunities have a way of disappearing, sometimes along with everything else. After they left, I called Ethan. They took the bait. Marcus just called. Said the health inspector recorded everything. James tried to bribe him to shut us down. I started gathering ingredients, my hands moving automatically through the motions of our grandmother's chocolate croissant recipe. Baking had always helped me think. Mal? Ethan's voice softened. Are you sure about tomorrow night? Once we do this. They're going to announce their project at our anniversary celebration either way, I said, measuring flour with perhaps more force than necessary. Might as well make it memorable. Luke called me, Ethan said quietly. Tried to convince me to talk you into selling. Said things could get ugly if we don't play along. The dough under my hands felt suddenly too soft, too yielding. Like everything else in my life lately. Did he mention what happened to Mom and Dad's original loan documents? No, but Marcus found them. In James's private safe. Along with proof he's been planning this since before Dad died. He's been playing the long game, Mal. Something inside me hardened. I thought about all the Sunday dinners James had attended, all the times he'd called me daughter, all while plotting to take everything we had. My phone buzzed again, another text, this time from Izzy. Luke knows I helped you. He's threatening to go to the police about the financial records. Let him, I typed back. Everything's in place. I looked around our kitchen, where Mom had taught me to bake, where Dad had dreamed up new recipes, where Luke and I had once planned our future. Ethan, I said, call Marcus. Tell him to move everything up. We're doing this tonight. Tonight? But the celebration. They're expecting us to wait. To be predictable. And that's exactly why we're not going to. I hung up and started cleaning the flour from my hands. The dough would have to wait. I had a different recipe to follow now, one that would serve revenge cold, with a side of justice. Let them think they had me cornered. Let them believe I was still the same passive, trusting person they'd chosen to betray. Tomorrow, they'd learn what happened when you pushed someone too far. Sometimes the quiet ones were the most dangerous. And I'd been quiet long enough. The bakery was packed for the impromptu community appreciation night we'd announced just hours ago. I watched from the kitchen as Luke and James worked the room, shaking hands and sharing knowing smiles. They thought they were here to announce their victory. Instead, they were walking into their own execution. Ready? Ethan asked, adjusting the microphone setup near our display counter. I nodded, though my hands shook as I arranged the last pastry tray. Each chocolate croissant was perfect, just like Mom used to make. It felt fitting, somehow, that her recipe would witness this. Marcus appeared at my elbow. Police are outside, waiting for my signal. Health inspector too. But Mal... He hesitated. James just got a call. Something's wrong. Before I could ask what he meant, James clinked his glass for attention. The crowd quieted, and my stomach dropped as I saw his expression, not triumphant, but predatory. Friends, he began, we're here to celebrate more than just community appreciation. We're here to announce an exciting new chapter for this neighborhood. But first, his eyes found mine. Let's address the elephant in the room. Mallory, why don't you tell everyone about the health code violations? Or the tax fraud? The room went silent. Luke stepped forward, holding up papers. We have proof, he said, his voice carrying that journalist's authority I'd once found so attractive. Proof that the beloved Jennings Bakery has been cutting corners, endangering customers, evading taxes. This wasn't part of the plan. They were supposed to announce the development project first. I looked at Marcus, who was frantically checking his phone. They've buried the real documents, he whispered. Someone got to my office. Everything we had is gone. The room started buzzing with concerned whispers. I saw regular customers exchanging worried glances, staff members shifting uncomfortably. That's not true, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. No. James pulled out more papers. These bank records show years of suspicious transactions. And these health reports. He shook his head sadly. Mallory, your parents would be so disappointed. Don't you dare talk about my parents, I snapped, but he spoke over me. In fact, I have your father's original loan agreement right here. The one where he specifically named me as the bakery's custodian if anything went wrong. He knew something like this might happen. The document he held up looked authentic, because it was. But not for the reasons he claimed. Tell them the truth, I demanded, stepping forward. Tell them how you forged those papers after Dad died. Tell them about the shell companies, the bribes, everything. Luke laughed, the sound cutting through me like glass. Shell companies? Bribes? Everyone, my wife is clearly struggling with the stress of running a failing business. We're only trying to help. By stealing everything my family built? My voice cracked. By saving what's left of it, James corrected smoothly. The police are already investigating the fraud. But I'm willing to make this go away quietly, if you sign over the bakery now. I looked around the room, saw doubt and confusion on every face. Even our most loyal customers were wavering. Years of trust, destroyed in minutes. Mal, Ethan warned, but I was already moving. I grabbed the file Marcus had given me earlier, our last copy of the evidence, our final chance. But as I opened it, my blood ran cold. The pages were blank. Looking for these? Luke held up another stack of papers. Amazing what people will give up when their own freedom is at stake. Izzy says hello, by the way. She's somewhere much warmer now, with a new identity and enough money to start fresh. The room spun. Everything we'd planned, every piece of evidence we'd gathered, gone. They'd played us perfectly, using our own scheme against us. You have 10 minutes to sign, James said quietly, sliding the transfer papers across the counter. Before I call the police in. I stared at the document, at the line where I was supposed to sign away my family's legacy. The room felt too hot, too crowded, closing in like the walls of a prison cell. Then I saw it, a small detail in the corner of James's forged loan document. A tiny flaw that changed everything. Maybe we'd lost this battle, but I suddenly knew how to win the war. I picked up the pen, my hand steady for the first time all night. Actually, James, I said, I think you should check those loan papers again. Very, very carefully. His smile faltered, just slightly, and I knew I had him. Sometimes rock bottom is exactly where you need to be to see the truth. The notary stamp, I said, watching James's face carefully. On Dad's loan document. It's dated 3 months after he died. The room went completely still. James's confident smile flickered, then died. A clerical error, he said quickly, but I was already pulling out my phone. Bringing up the photo I'd taken of the original document. The real one. The night before Dad died. No, James. It's fraud. Just like everything else you've done. I turned to address the crowd. My father never signed custody of this bakery over to anyone. James forged that document after Dad died, just like he forged health code violations and fabricated tax records. Luke stepped forward, but Ethan blocked his path. Careful, my brother warned. The police outside might be interested in those bribes you tried to pay the health inspector. You have no proof, Luke snapped, but his voice wavered. Actually, a new voice called from the back, they do. Izzy pushed through the crowd, looking nothing like the polished finance director who'd fled town. I didn't go to somewhere warmer, Luke. I went to the FBI. James lunged for the documents on the counter, but Marcus was faster. Those blank pages, he said, holding them up. Decoys. The real evidence is already with the authorities, including the recordings of every meeting where you planned this. You really should sweep your office for bugs more often, I added, watching James's face turn ashen. Luke's journalist instincts kicked in. He started backing toward the door. I had no idea about the forgery, he said quickly. James told me the development project was legitimate. Save it for your cellmate, Ethan cut in. The FBI has your emails. All of them. The police chose that moment to enter, led by a federal agent who looked far too pleased with himself. James Morrison? Lucas Turner? You're both under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted extortion. As they were being cuffed, James turned to me, his mask finally cracking. Your father was weak, he spat. He would have lost this place anyway. I was doing you a favor. My father, I said quietly, taught me that patience and loyalty matter more than quick profits. That family isn't just about blood, it's about trust. I picked up one of Mom's chocolate croissants. He also taught me that the best revenge, like the best recipes, takes time to perfect. The crowd parted as the police led them out. Through the window, I could see reporters gathering, drawn by the commotion. Tomorrow, Luke's name would be in the headlines, but not the way he'd planned. Izzy approached me cautiously. I'm sorry it took me so long to do the right thing. You did it when it mattered, I said. That's what counts. As the excitement died down, Marcus pulled me aside. There's something else you should know, he said. That warning letter you received? The one signed L? I wrote it. I stared at him. What? James destroyed my family's business 20 years ago, the same way he tried to destroy yours. I've been tracking him ever since, waiting for a chance to expose him. When I heard about your bakery, he shrugged. Sometimes justice needs a little push. I thought about all the pieces that had led us here, the letter, the investigation, even Izzy's conscience. Each one a necessary ingredient in a recipe for justice. Ethan joined us, throwing an arm around my shoulders. So, he said, what now? I looked around at our bakery, at the familiar walls that held so many memories, at our customers who were already lining up again, showing their support with their presence. Now, I said, we bake. We rebuild. We remember that sometimes the things that try to break us end up making us stronger instead. And Luke. I watched through the window as my soon-to-be ex-husband was placed in a police car. He wanted headlines. Now he'll get them. The morning light was starting to stream through our windows, catching on the display cases and making everything glow. Another day was beginning, and for the first time in months, I could breathe freely. Sometimes the sweetest victory isn't in destroying your enemies, but in surviving them. In proving that what they tried to break was unbreakable all along. 6 months after Luke and James's arrests, I stood in our kitchen, teaching a group of at-risk teens how to make my mother's chocolate croissants. The bakery's new community outreach program was my way of turning betrayal into something beautiful. The secret, I told them, is patience. Good things take time. Through the window, I could see Ethan chatting with customers, his easy charm unchanged by everything we'd been through. The bakery was thriving again, our reputation restored after the truth about James's schemes made headlines. The bell chimed and Marcus walked in, carrying a familiar-looking envelope. Last piece of paperwork, he said, sliding it across the counter. Luke's plea deal is final. He's serving 5 years, James got 12. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The envelope contained my final divorce papers, waiting for my signature. As I reached for a pen, one of the teens, Maria, whose mother worked 2 jobs to support her family, spoke up. Miss Jennings? The dough's ready. I smiled, setting the envelope aside. Some things could wait. Later, after the class ended and the day's business wound down, Izzy stopped by. She looked different now, more genuine, less polished. The witness protection program had given her a new start, but she'd chosen to stay nearby, working with the FBI to uncover similar schemes in other communities. The foundation paperwork is ready, she said, referring to the nonprofit we'd established to help small businesses protect themselves from fraud. And you'll never guess who called asking to make a donation. Who? Luke. From prison. Says he wants to make amends. I thought about that while closing up, remembering how revenge had tasted less sweet than I'd imagined. Justice had mattered more, and healing most of all. The next morning, I arrived early to bake, just like always. But today was different. Today marked 1 year since that anonymous letter had appeared on my desk. Marcus was waiting outside, looking uncomfortable in a way his usual confident demeanor never allowed. There's something else you should know, he said. About why I helped you. He pulled out an old photograph, a family standing in front of a bakery much like ours. My parents' place, he explained, before James destroyed it. But here's the thing. Your father tried to stop him back then. Tried to warn my parents, but they didn't listen. The revelation hit me hard. Dad had never mentioned this, but it explained why he'd been so careful with our business, why he'd taught us to value loyalty over profit. That's why you wrote the letter, I said. You were repaying a debt. I was finishing what your father started. James had to be stopped, but it had to come from within, from someone he thought he could manipulate. You. I thought about how close we'd come to losing everything, how many layers of betrayal and loyalty had brought us to this moment. Was any of it real? Your help, your concern. All of it, he said quietly. Some debts can't be repaid with just justice. Sometimes they need something more. That evening, I sat in Dad's old office, looking at the envelope containing my divorce papers. Next to it sat another envelope, Luke's request to donate to our foundation. And beside that, a stack of applications from more teens wanting to join our baking program. I picked up the photo of our family that Luke had scratched out all those months ago. We'd replaced the broken frame, but kept the damaged photo as a reminder. Not of betrayal, but of growth. Ethan found me there, carrying 2 cups of coffee. You okay? Yeah, I said, and meant it. Just thinking about recipes. He grinned, knowing I wasn't talking about baking. The best ones get passed down, he said, but sometimes they need updating. I signed the divorce papers finally, then reached for the foundation applications. Tomorrow, we'd teach more kids how to bake, how to build, how to trust. And maybe, just maybe, we'd break the cycle that had nearly broken us. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's creating something new from the ashes of betrayal, something that helps heal not just yourself, but others too. That's the recipe I choose to follow now. I never meant to find that room. If I'd just minded my own business like Father always insisted, maybe things would have turned out differently. But then again, maybe they were always meant to unravel this way. My name is Millie, and until last Tuesday, I thought I knew everything about our family sprawling mansion. Growing up here, I'd explored every corner, from the wine cellar to the attic. Or so I believed. I was looking for Mother's old art supplies in the East Wing when I noticed something odd about the wallpaper near Father's private study. A slight discoloration, barely visible unless you were right up close. I probably wouldn't have even spotted it if I hadn't been procrastinating on my college applications. Running my fingers along the seam, I felt a slight draft. The wall panel gave way under pressure, revealing a keypad hidden behind the wallpaper. I should have walked away. Instead, I punched in Father's birthday, the code he used for everything, despite my brother Henry's constant lectures about security. The panel slid open with a soft hiss. What are you doing up here? Henry's voice made me jump. He stood at the end of the hallway, his usually perfect hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. I gestured vaguely at the open panel. Did you know about this? Henry's face went pale. Millie, close that right now. You can't be here. But I was already stepping inside. The room was small, maybe 12 by 15 feet, with steel filing cabinets lining the walls and a desk covered in documents. What caught my eye, though, was the gun rack mounted on the far wall. These aren't hunting rifles, I whispered, recognizing the sleek shapes of weapons that had no business being in our home. Henry grabbed my arm. We need to go. Now. Wait. I pulled away, moving toward the desk. A folder lay open, revealing what looked like shipping manifests. The company name at the top, Thompson Global Solutions, was familiar, but the contents listed made no sense. Since when does Father's company deal in military equipment? Millie, please. Henry's voice cracked. Some things are better left alone. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Henry cursed under his breath and pulled me behind one of the cabinets just as Father's voice drifted in. The wedding arrangements are proceeding as planned, Father was saying. Once Millie's married to David Reed, Marcus's cooperation will be guaranteed. I felt the blood drain from my face. David Reed was Marcus's son, a man I'd met exactly once at a company gala last month. He was at least 15 years older than me and had spent the entire evening staring at me like I was a prize horse at auction. And if she refuses? It was Marcus's voice, smooth as oil. Father's laugh was cold. She won't. Millie knows her duty to this family. Besides, she's still young enough to be guided. I must have made some small sound because Henry's hand clamped over my mouth. We stayed frozen as Father and Marcus continued their conversation, discussing business deals that sounded more and more like something out of a crime thriller. When their voices finally faded, Henry released me. I turned to face him, trembling. "How long have you known?" "Millie." He ran a hand through his hair again. "It's complicated." "Complicated?" I hissed. "Father's running some kind of illegal weapons operation and planning to marry me off like it's the 1800s. What's complicated about that?" Before Henry could answer, my phone buzzed. A text from Mother. "Your father wants everyone dressed for dinner in an hour. He has an announcement to make." I looked at Henry, and for the first time in my life, I saw real fear in my brother's eyes. "You need to act normal," he whispered. "Like you never saw any of this. Promise me." But as we carefully closed the hidden room and headed downstairs, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't pretend anymore. Not when my entire future was about to be traded away like a business asset. I had to find a way out. The dinner announcement felt like a noose tightening around my neck. I sat at our massive dining table, pushing food around my plate while Father held court at the head, all smiles and charm. Mother perched beside him, her face a perfect mask of serenity that only slipped when she thought no one was looking. "David Reed will be joining us for dinner tomorrow night," Father announced, his voice carrying that tone that meant no discussion was welcome. "I expect everyone to make him feel welcome." I dropped my fork with a clatter. "I'm actually feeling quite ill. Maybe I should skip." "Nonsense." Father's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "You're 18 now, Millie. It's time you started taking an interest in the family business." Henry caught my eye from across the table, a silent warning in his expression. I forced myself to nod and mumble something agreeable. After dinner, I followed Mother to her studio. She was already mixing paints, her hands steady despite the slight tremor in her voice. "Your father means well, darling." "Does he?" I closed the door behind me. "Like he meant well when he drove away all your artist friends? When he made you stop exhibiting your work?" Mother's brush stilled on the canvas. "That's different. I chose this life." "Did you really choose? Or did he just make all your other options disappear?" She turned to face me, and for the first time in years, I saw something crack in her carefully maintained composure. "There are things you don't understand about your father, about the way this world works." "Then help me understand." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "I found his secret room today. The weapons, the documents." "Stop." Mother's paint-stained fingers gripped my wrist. "Some questions are dangerous to ask, Millie. Your father. He doesn't handle disloyalty well. What happened to Uncle James?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Uncle James, Father's younger brother, had disappeared 3 years ago. The official story was that he'd moved to Australia, but he'd never called, never written. Mother's face went ash-white. "Please, Millie, don't." A knock at the door made us both jump. Henry entered, his expression grim. "Father wants to see you in his study, Millie." "Now." My heart hammered as I climbed the stairs. The hidden room was just feet away from Father's study, its secrets burning in my mind. When I entered, Father was standing at the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Close the door," he said without turning around. I did, my fingers trembling slightly. "You remind me so much of your uncle sometimes," he said, and my blood ran cold. "Always questioning, always pushing boundaries." "I don't know what you mean." He turned then, fixing me with those steel-gray eyes that could strip away pretense like paint. "Henry tells me you've been asking about James." Mental note: never trust Henry with sensitive information again. "I just wondered why he never calls," I said carefully. "We were close." "Family is everything, Millie." Father set down his glass and approached me. "But family loyalty must be absolute." James forgot that. He started asking questions, making accusations. It became messy. The threat wasn't subtle. I forced myself to meet his gaze. "I understand, Father." "Do you?" He touched my cheek, a gesture that once meant comfort but now felt like ownership. Tomorrow night, you'll wear the blue dress your mother bought you. You'll smile, laugh at David's jokes, and show him what a perfect Thompson daughter you are. Because that's what family does. We play our parts. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Good girl. He kissed my forehead. You may go. I managed to walk calmly until I reached my room. Then I collapsed against the door, my whole body shaking. Through the window, I could see Mother's studio light still burning, a lonely beacon in the darkness. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to the only person who might understand. Henry, we need to talk. About Uncle James. The response came quickly. Delete this message. Meet me at the old boathouse. Midnight. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Whatever happened to Uncle James, I had a feeling I was about to find out. And something told me it would change everything. The old boathouse creaked in the midnight wind, its weathered boards a stark contrast to our mansion's polished facade. I'd barely made it through the door when Henry grabbed my arm, pulling me into the shadows. We're not alone, he whispered. Marcus Reed emerged from behind a stack of canoes, his expensive suit looking out of place among the cobwebs and dust. Miss Thompson, how nice of you to join us. My stomach dropped. What's he doing here? Your brother and I have been having some interesting conversations, Marcus said, his smile never reaching his eyes. About your father's business practices. About Uncle James. I turned to Henry, betrayal burning in my throat. You told him. He needed to know, Henry said. Show her. Marcus pulled out his phone, playing a video that made my blood run cold. It showed Uncle James arguing with Father in his study. The timestamp was from 3 years ago, the night before he moved to Australia. Your uncle discovered certain irregularities in the company books, Marcus explained. Weapons being sold to some very unsavory people. He threatened to expose everything. The video ended with Father making a phone call. Take care of it. That's not. I couldn't finish the sentence. Not what? Henry's voice was bitter. Not like our father? Wake up, Millie. James isn't in Australia. He's buried somewhere in the woods behind the country club. My legs gave out, and I sank onto an overturned bucket. Why are you showing me this now? Because history's about to repeat itself, Marcus said. Your father's planning something big. Something that would make the weapons dealing look like a parking ticket. And he's using your marriage to David to secure my loyalty. I won't do it, I said. I'll run away. Like Catherine did? Henry asked quietly. The name hit me like a slap. Catherine, my cousin who'd disappeared 10 years ago. Another family mystery I'd been too young to question. How many? I whispered. How many people has he? Too many, Marcus said. But we can stop him. With your help. I looked between them, these men plotting in shadows. Why should I trust either of you? Because I can get you out, Marcus said. New identity, new life, far from here. But first, we need evidence. The kind that's in that room you found. My heart raced. You want me to steal from Father's secret room? We want you to save yourself, Henry said. And maybe Mother too, before it's too late. A noise outside made us all freeze. Footsteps on the dock. Tomorrow night, Marcus whispered urgently. During the dinner with David. The study will be empty. It's your only chance. We scattered like shadows, leaving through different exits. I made it back to my room just as Father's security detail passed beneath my window. Sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, Uncle James's face haunting me. Had he felt this same terror in his final hours? Had Catherine? My phone buzzed at dawn. A text from an unknown number. Meet me at the coffee shop on Grove Street. 7 a.m. Come alone. J. I almost deleted it, but something made me hesitate. The initial, J, could have been coincidence, but the timing was too perfect. I got dressed quickly, my mind racing. If I was going to survive this, I needed more allies. More information. The weapons in Father's room weren't just for show. They were a promise of what happened to people who crossed him. As I slipped out of the house, I caught sight of Mother in her studio, already painting. But this time, I noticed what she was working on, a landscape of the country club grounds, with dark shapes hidden among the trees. She'd known. All this time, she'd been painting her grief, her guilt, her secrets. I couldn't end up like her, trapped in a gilded cage with blood-stained memories. I couldn't become another family mystery, whispered about but never discussed. The coffee shop was 3 blocks away. Each step felt like a choice between life and death, trust and betrayal, action and paralysis. Whatever waited for me there, whoever Jay was, had to be better than the fate Father had planned for me. Because now I understood, in our family, marriage wasn't an arrangement. It was a sentence. The coffee shop was nearly empty when I arrived. A man sat in the corner booth, his face hidden behind a newspaper. As I approached, he lowered it slowly, and my world tilted sideways. Uncle James? He looked different, thinner, grayer, with a scar running along his jawline. But those eyes were unmistakable. Thompson eyes. "Sit down, Millie," he said quietly. "We don't have much time." My hands shook as I slid into the booth. "You're supposed to be dead." I was supposed to be a lot of things. He pushed a manila envelope across the table. "Your father's men will be here in 10 minutes. Security noticed you leaving the house." I grabbed the envelope. "How are you even alive?" "I saw the video. Marcus showed you exactly what Richard wanted everyone to see." James glanced at his watch. "The real video shows your father ordering my execution. But Marcus had other plans. He helped me disappear, kept me informed. Now I'm returning the favor." The pieces clicked together. Marcus isn't really helping Henry and me, is he? Marcus helps Marcus. He's playing both sides, waiting to see which horse will win the race. James leaned forward. "But you're different. You have a chance to get out like I did. Everything you need is in that envelope. New identity, accounts, contacts. Use it tonight, during the dinner party." My throat tightened. "What about Mother?" Henry made his choice when he aligned with Marcus. "Your mother." James's expression softened. "Eleanor knows more than she lets on. She's stronger than you think." A black SUV rolled past the window. James tensed. "One more thing," he said, sliding a key across the table. "Storage Unit 247, Central Storage. What's inside might help you understand why your father is so desperate to keep control of the family. But be careful. Knowledge is dangerous in our world." He stood, adjusting his cap. "Good luck, Millie. You're braver than I was at your age." I watched him disappear through the back door just as 2 of Father's security men entered through the front. I slipped the envelope into my bag and pretended to study the menu. Back home, I found Mother in the garden, pruning roses with mechanical precision. Her hands were bleeding, but she didn't seem to notice. "The blue roses are dying," she said without looking up. "Your father's favorite." I touched her shoulder. "Mother, I know where you went this morning." She finally met my eyes. James was always good at hiding. Like Catherine. My heart stopped. "Catherine's alive?" Mother smiled sadly. "The Thompson women survive, Millie. We adapt." She pressed something cold into my palm, a locket. "Whatever you decide to do tonight, remember that." I opened my mouth to respond, but Father's voice cut through the garden. "There's my girls." He approached with Marcus and David Reed in tow. David's eyes crawled over me like insects. "Doesn't Millie look lovely today?" Father said, his hand heavy on my shoulder. "David was just saying how much he's looking forward to dinner tonight." I forced a smile, feeling the locket burn against my palm. "Can't wait." Later, in my room, I opened the envelope. Inside were documents, cash, and a note. "The truth about Catherine is in the storage unit. She's waiting for you in Montreal. Jay." My phone buzzed. "Henry, whatever you're planning, don't trust Marcus." He showed Father the coffee shop footage. Another buzz. "Unknown number. Storage unit compromised. Don't go there. Meet me at the old church instead. 8 p.m. Jay." But something felt wrong. The handwriting in the second note was different from James's first one. A trap? I looked out my window at the gathering storm clouds. In 6 hours, dinner would begin. In 6 hours, I'd either be free or follow in Uncle James's footsteps, running, hiding, surviving. Or worse, I'd end up like the others who had crossed Father. I opened the locket Mother gave me. Inside wasn't a photo, but a tiny key. On its head was engraved, 247. Mother's words echoed in my mind. The Thompson women survive. Time to prove her right. The storage unit key felt like it was burning a hole in my evening clutch as I sat through the most excruciating dinner of my life. David Reed's hand kept finding its way to my knee under the table, while Father watched with approving eyes. Mother hadn't come down. A migraine, she'd claimed. But I'd seen the packed overnight bag hidden under her bed. I was thinking a spring wedding, David announced, his fingers digging into my leg. April, perhaps? I shifted away, accidentally catching Henry's eye across the table. His face was a mask, but his knuckles were white around his wine glass. Wonderful idea, Father beamed. Millie, darling, why don't you show David the garden? The roses are lovely in the moonlight. It wasn't a suggestion. I stood, forcing a smile that felt like broken glass. Of course. The moment we stepped outside, David's charm evaporated. He grabbed my arm, spinning me to face him. Let's be clear about something. I know you're planning something stupid. Marcus told me about your little coffee shop meeting. I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. I don't know what you're talking about. Uncle James? He laughed coldly. Did you really think he'd risk everything to save you? He's dead, sweetheart. Has been for years. Marcus played you, and now you're going to play your part like a good little wife, or Daddy Dearest finds out everything. A shadow moved near the roses. Mother stood there, pruning shears in hand, watching us with an expression I'd never seen before. David, she called softly. I believe Richard wanted to discuss business details with you. He released me, straightening his jacket. We'll continue this conversation later, dear. The moment he disappeared inside, Mother pressed something into my hand. Car keys. Storage unit 247, she whispered. Go now. I'll keep them distracted. But, now, Millie. I ran. The storage facility was only 10 minutes away, but every shadow looked like Father's security detail. Every car behind me could have been Marcus or David. Unit 247 was at the back of the complex. The key worked, but the door stuck. I heaved it up, and the smell hit me first, musty papers and old leather. Inside was a lifetime of secrets. Filing cabinets lined one wall, each drawer labeled with a year. On a desk sat a laptop and a stack of USB drives. But what caught my eye was the corkboard covered in photos, Father with men I'd seen in news reports about organized crime, weapon shipments, money transfers. And in the center, a photo of Catherine. She was older than in my memories, the timestamp showing it was taken just last year. She was alive. My phone buzzed. Henry, Father knows you're gone. Get out now. I grabbed the laptop and drives, shoving them into my bag. As I reached for Catherine's photo, headlights swept across the storage unit's entrance. Millie? A man's voice, one I didn't recognize. I'm Jake. Your mother sent me. We need to move. I peered around the door. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-20s, with kind eyes that didn't match the gun holstered under his jacket. How do I know you're telling the truth? He held up his phone, showing a text from Mother's private number. The Thompson women survive. Another set of headlights appeared at the entrance to the storage facility. Choose now, Jake said quietly. But choose fast. My phone buzzed again. An unknown number. Trust Jake. He was Catherine's way out. Now he's yours. Love, Mom. The approaching headlights belonged to a black SUV, Father's security detail. I looked at Jake, then at the evidence in my bag. Everything I needed to destroy Father's empire or save myself. I couldn't do both. Which way to Montreal? I asked. Jake smiled, extending his hand. Let me show you. Behind us, voices shouted. Orders were given. But as we slipped into the shadows, I finally understood what Mother meant. Survival wasn't about running away. It was about choosing when to fight back. 3 days into our escape, Jake's car broke down outside Montreal. We were huddled in a dingy motel room, watching snow fall through a cracked window when my phone lit up with a video call from Henry. My brother's face was bruised, one eye swollen shut. They know everything, Millie. Jake moved closer, his hand steady on my shoulder. Who did this to you? Marcus. Henry's laugh was bitter. Turns out he's been playing both sides longer than we thought. He is Uncle James. The room tilted sideways. James is alive? Barely. Father's keeping him in the basement of the country club. But that's not, Henry glanced over his shoulder. Mother's missing. After she helped you escape, she went to her studio and never came out. There was blood on her roses. The phone slipped from my fingers. Jake caught it, continuing the conversation while I stumbled to the bathroom. The face in the mirror looked like a stranger, dark circles under my eyes, hair tangled from days of running. Your father's men are an hour behind us, Jake said from the doorway. We need to move. I gripped the sink. We have to go back. That's suicide. They have my family. The mirror cracked under my fist, blood welling up between my knuckles. Mother, James, Henry, they're all suffering because I ran. Jake pulled out his gun, checking the magazine. There's something you need to know. I worked for your father before I helped Catherine escape. I was his cleaner. The word hung between us like poison. Did you? I couldn't finish the question. No, but I helped hide the bodies of those who crossed him. That's why I got out, helped Catherine get out. And now they're using that against me. He showed me his phone, photos of Catherine, clearly recent, clearly captive. Marcus sent these an hour ago. Everything clicked into place. You didn't help me because Mother asked. You needed the evidence in that storage unit to save Catherine. His silence was answer enough. I opened my bag, pulling out the laptop and drives. Then let's use it. All of it. Take down Father, Marcus, everyone. They'll kill them all the moment we try. Not if we're smart. I powered up the laptop, fingers flying over the keys. Father always said knowledge is power. Let's see what secrets he's been keeping. The files were encrypted, but I recognized the pattern, the same code Father used for everything. His arrogance would be his downfall. A message popped up on my phone, final warning. Come home now or Mother joins Uncle James. You have 1 hour. David. Attached was a photo of Mother's studio, her easel smashed, blood on the flowers. I can't lose anyone else, I whispered. Jake checked his gun again. Sometimes the only way to save everyone is to risk everything. Or lose everything. He touched my cheek, turning my face toward his. Your father took everything from me once. I won't let him do it again. The laptop chimed, files decrypted. What I saw made my blood run cold. Weapon sales were just the beginning. Human trafficking, political assassinations, evidence of murders stretching back decades. Including proof that Catherine wasn't Father's first victim, just the first to survive. Another message buzzed through. Tick-tock. Daddy's getting impatient. David. I looked at Jake, at the evidence that could destroy my father's empire, at the proof that could save lives, but might cost me everyone I loved. We can run, Jake offered quietly. Start new lives. Let it all burn behind us. But Mother's words echoed in my head. The Thompson women survive. No, I said, closing the laptop. We're going back. But not to surrender. They'll be expecting that. I pulled Mother's locket from my pocket, studying the key that had started everything. Exactly. They're expecting a scared little girl running home to Daddy. Instead, they're going to get what Father always feared most. What's that? I smiled, and for the first time, I saw my father's steel in my own reflection. A Thompson who's not afraid of him anymore. The snow kept falling outside our window, covering our tracks, burying the past. By morning, it would be time to face the future, whatever the cost. The country club's basement smelled like copper and fear. Jake and I moved silently through the darkness, guided by the blueprints Henry had sent. Somewhere above us, Father was hosting his annual charity gala, the perfect cover for what was about to happen. We found Uncle James first, handcuffed to a pipe. His face was bloody, but his eyes lit up when he saw us. Should have known Eleanor's daughter wouldn't run forever. Mother, I whispered, working on his restraints. Storage room down the hall. Marcus has been keeping her separate from me. Smart man, she nearly took his eye out with her paintbrush. Jake handed James a gun. Catherine? Top floor. Richard's office. He's keeping her close tonight. Footsteps echoed above us. The gala was in full swing, crystal glasses clinking to the sound of blood money changing hands. You remember the plan? I asked James. He nodded, checking the gun. Create a distraction in the main hall. Get the police here. Keep them busy while you handle Richard. And Marcus? James's smile was cold. Leave Marcus to me. He and I have unfinished business. We split up. Jake and I found Mother exactly where James said. She was already free, picking the lock with a broken easel wire. When she saw us, she pressed a finger to her lips and pointed upward. Marcus's voice drifted down from the stairwell. Richard wants them alive, he was saying. Especially the girl. He has plans for her. Mother's eyes met mine. In them, I saw 18 years of carefully contained rage. She mouthed one word. Go. Jake squeezed my hand before melting into the shadows, heading for the security room. Everything was in place. Now came the hard part. I climbed the stairs alone, Father's encrypted files burning a hole in my pocket. The hallway to his office stretched before me like a gauntlet. Inside, I could hear him talking. Your cousin never did learn, he was saying. But you will, won't you, Catherine? I pushed open the door. Father sat behind his desk, looking exactly as he had at dinner 4 days ago. Catherine stood by the window, older but unmistakable, a bruise darkening her cheek. Hello, Father. He didn't seem surprised to see me. I knew you'd come home eventually. Thompson blood always tells. That's what Mother says. I moved closer, noting the gun on his desk. Though I don't think she meant it quite the same way you do. Where's the evidence, Millie? Safe. Unless anything happens to my family, any of them. His laugh was genuine. You think you can blackmail me? I taught you everything you know. Not everything. I pulled out my phone, showing him the live feed Jake had set up. Right now, every screen in the main hall is showing your secret files. The weapons deals. The murders. Everything. For the first time, Father's composure cracked. Below us, chaos erupted as his carefully curated world began to crumble. You're bluffing. Mother taught me to paint, Father. But you taught me how to destroy things. He reached for the gun, but Catherine was faster. She grabbed his wrist, slamming it against the desk. I dove for the weapon as it skittered across the floor. When I stood, Father was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. You're just like him, he whispered. Like James. Weak. Sentimental. No, I said, keeping the gun steady. I'm just like you. I learned to take what I want. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Through the window, I could see guests fleeing, Marcus being tackled by James, Mother emerging from the basement like an avenging angel. What do you want? Father asked quietly. I want you to know what it feels like to lose everything. To watch your world burn and know you can't stop it. I stepped back toward the door. I want you to live with it like we all had to. His face contorted with rage as he lunged forward, but Catherine's punch dropped him cold. She looked at me, tears in her eyes. Ready to get out of here, cousin? I nodded, hearing Jake's footsteps in the hall, knowing Mother and James were safe below. The Thompson women survive, I said, watching Father's empire collapse around him. And for the first time in my life, those words felt like a promise instead of a curse. 6 months after Father's arrest, I stood in Mother's new studio in Montreal, watching her paint the sunrise. Her hands were steady now, no longer trembling under the weight of secrets. The canvas bloomed with colors she'd never dared use in the mansion. Fierce reds, defiant purples, free-flowing blues. Henry called, she said, adding a streak of gold to the horizon. The trial date is set. I nodded, fingering the locket that had started everything. Will you testify? We all will. She set down her brush, studying her work. Even Catherine. Catherine had disappeared again after that night, but differently this time, on her own terms, with a promise to return. She sent postcards from places Father had forbidden us to visit, each one signed with a simple, "The Thompson women survive." Uncle James appeared in the doorway, his scars fading, but still visible. Jake's here with the files from the safe deposit box. My heart jumped at Jake's name, even now. He entered carrying a familiar stack of documents, but his eyes were only for me. We'd grown closer over these months, building something careful and real from the ashes of our shared trauma. "You need to see this," he said, laying out the papers. "Your mother's been busy for years." The documents told a story I'd never suspected. Mother hadn't just been painting all those years, she'd been documenting every transaction, every crime, every victim. Her artwork contained hidden messages, dates, locations. She'd built a case against father piece by piece, painting by painting. "I couldn't save James when Richard tried to kill him," Mother said quietly. "But I could make sure his crimes wouldn't stay buried forever." "The paintings in your studio," I realized. "The ones Father never let anyone see." "Evidence," she confirmed. "All of it. I knew someday one of us would be strong enough to use it." James squeezed her shoulder. "You were always the strong one, Eleanor. We just didn't see it." A text lit up my phone. "Henry, David Reed rolled on Father. Marcus too. It's really over." But was it? Father still haunted my dreams sometimes, his voice whispering about Thompson blood and family loyalty. In quiet moments, I caught myself checking over my shoulder, planning escape routes. "You're not him," Jake said softly, reading my thoughts like he always could. "You never were." I opened the locket, looking at the key that had unlocked so much more than just a storage unit. "No, I'm not. I'm my mother's daughter." Mother smiled, turning back to her canvas. The sunrise she'd painted wasn't just breaking, it was shattering the darkness, sending shards of night scattering like a broken mirror. "I got another postcard from Catherine," I said. "She's in Paris. Says we should join her." "Will you go?" James asked. I looked around the studio, at Mother finally creating freely, at Jake's steady presence beside me, at the family we'd pieced together from broken parts. "Not yet," I decided. "First, we have a trial to finish, a story to tell. And after," Jake's hand found mine, "after we live. Not just survive, live." Mother added one final stroke to her painting, a small figure standing in the breaking dawn, face turned toward the light. Looking closer, I realized it wasn't one figure, but many, their shadows intertwined, holding each other up. My phone buzzed again. An unknown number, but I knew who it was. "Found something you should see. Another family secret, but this one's different. When you're ready. See." I smiled, tucking the phone away. Some mysteries could wait. Some secrets were better unveiled slowly, in their own time. Outside, snow was falling, Montreal's endless winter finally giving way to spring. Soon, Father would face justice. Soon, our testimony would ensure he never hurt another family again. But for now, I was content to watch Mother paint, to feel Jake's hand in mine, to know that Uncle James was safe and Catherine was free. To understand finally that revenge hadn't healed us, truth had. The Thompson women survived. But more than that, we learned to live. And that was the greatest victory of all.